Excellent. Thank you.
And Jason, are you ready?
Think we are.
Okay, I'm going to mute everybody, and then Jason and Kenny, when it's your turn, go ahead and unmute.
All right. Well, hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the December General Club meeting for Mike and Key. Today we've got a wonderful presentation by Kenny Richards from the WWARA. We're excited to have him and a couple of his other fellow board members on with us, and they'll be presenting a great presentation and then have some, I think, some live discussion, Kenny said, so that'll be good. I'm going to read, Kenny gave me a little bio for himself, so I'm going to just read it. We also posted this for everyone, so Kenny, hopefully you don't blush too badly, but let's see, Kenny has been a ham for nearly 35 years, first licensed in high school. He has worked at Amazon for the last 15 years and currently is a senior technical program manager in the CDO group. He has worked in multiple Amazon business units, including AWS, Marketplace, and currently the group responsible for operating the retail websites. In addition to holding the secretary role for the last 8 years, he also manages the website and database, which is used to operate the coordination process. In addition to his WWARA duties, he is also the lead Laurel VE for San Juan County and a member of the NetOps group for HamWAN. Oh, that's cool. Kenny currently operates 2 D-Star repeaters and volunteers supporting multiple systems around the state. So with that said, Kenny, if you want to unmute yourself and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everybody. I need to share my screen first. And then once I am sharing, can someone confirm that you guys can see that okay?
We can see it.
Thank you.
Looks great.
One of the problems with doing the presentation is that I lose the Zoom window. So I have the slides up that I'm screen sharing, and I have my meeting notes up, so I can't see chat or anything like that. So I have 2 cohorts here with me today. They're going to help me by monitoring things, and they're very good at interrupting me and telling me to shut up when there's questions and things like that. So I also want to do Scott in 7SS. He's the vice chair of the WWARA, and I'm assuming most of you know he's very, very active in the MCOM world, works for so much DEM. And then Steve is here in 9VW. He's the 70cm band chair and the new secretary for the WWARA. And also just a really, really knowledgeable guy about repeaters and all things like that. So, hey, you know what? I just looked at my slide note. Sorry, go ahead.
The screen is blank.
Really? Okay.
No, the screen is being shared properly.
It's
No,
shared
it looks
properly.
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Okay. All right. Cool. So I'll go ahead and continue then. So as Jason said, my name is Kenny Richards on KU7M. I was actually just ousted from the secretary position a couple weeks ago for the WWRA. I'm actually now the chairman, or will be in January. So I'm not sure if I got demoted or got kicked in the wrong direction there, but so I'm still actively involved. I still got a lot of things that I want to try to accomplish with it. But what I want to talk about this morning is a couple of different topics. So my own background has always been a very big interest in VHF, UHF, in microwave stuff. I've never been the type of person that wants to chase DX or do CW or anything like that. And all my contesting experience is actually in VHF and UHF contesting. So this space has been kind of been my thing for amateur radio for most of my time in it. So what I want to talk about today is I want to cover some of the basics about repeaters. And I'm assuming most people understand basically what they are. So I'm gonna give a little more detailed background on some of the special things about them. And then I want to also talk about the WWARA, which is the Western Washington Amateur Relay Association, and it's the official coordination group for Western Washington. and talk about why it exists, some of the things that it does, what role we play in repeater coordination, things like that. And then I want to talk about some trends that I started noticing a couple of years ago, which led to this idea about narrowbanding, and talk about what narrowbanding means, why it's something that's actually already happening, whether we like it or not, and then what the proposal talks about, which is how do we define what narrowband should be in the future at some point down the road. I like questions during the talk, so please go ahead and interrupt if you have a question. I just apologize, I can't see you raise your hand, so you have to just be rude and tell me to be quiet because you have a question. But I very much appreciate that. The only thing I caveat is that I might ask you to hold the question because you've asked something that I'm just about to explain on the next slide, and I might ask you just to hold it for a second. But with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Whoops. So what is a repeater? I'm assuming most people are familiar with what a repeater is. The idea is that you put a transmitter and receiver up on a very high location so that it can hear more users. And when you transmit into on one frequency, it is then retransmitted on another frequency. And what this does, it allows VHF and UHF communication to happen over a much larger area distance than would be possible with simplex. It does require two frequencies though. There's an input and output. So there's a frequency that you transmit into, and then there's one that you actually listen to when it's retransmitted. And this magic of transmitting and receiving at the same time in the same band, actually fairly close together, is all possible because of some really good filtering. The primary one is they're typically referred to as a duplexer, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about it. But these devices, this filtering has to be very specifically tuned, and there's a fancy gear that goes into tuning them, and it's the magic that allows basically repeaters to work. So just out of curiosity, how many people have actually heard of repeater coordination before? Is this something that are generally familiar with, and I can't really see hands, so I really need to figure out how to watch both at the same time. So I'm assuming that there's been some people that have raised their hand. But repeater coordination exists because repeaters are not frequency agile, is the technical description, meaning that you can't just change the frequency of the repeater willy-nilly and have it move to some place where there isn't any interference or anybody using it. It's actually stuck. And the reason it's stuck is that filtering that I mentioned before that's very specifically tuned to the input and the output frequencies that allow both of those, the transmitting and the receiving, to happen at the same time. Because of this, and because at some point during the ham radio lifetime, the FCC actually said, you know what, in order to help prevent interference and to help provide amateurs a way to manage themselves, we're going to recognize frequency coordination. And they do this in part 97.3, and it's very basic. I think it's only a couple sentences, but the gist of it says is that if there's an interference complaint between two repeaters, FCC is going to give preference to the one that's coordinated by the repeater coordination group. And that in essence is all the power that we have as repeater coordinators. We don't get to arbitrate, we don't get to tell people they can't do something, but we provide a recommendation list. And that's kind of the gist of it. So who actually authorizes repeater coordinators? And I mean, the FCC obviously acknowledges they exist, but who deems them as you are the one for Western Washington? So so my first question is, who thinks it's the who thinks it's the ARL? Okay, who thinks it's actually the FCC it's themselves? Whoops, I need to hit space twice. So who thinks it's the State Patrol of Washington, which is, I just kind of threw in the C option that isn't actually it's the one to throw you off. So reality is none of these do. There is no process, no official process that says you have been dubbed the repeater coordination group for Western Washington. It's literally the amateurs in the area that say, we need this done. and you have foolishly agreed to sign up to do it. So you are the repeater coordinators. So it's basically all the repeater owners that say, um, we are going to look to you to do this just job because it needs to be done, and you've you have a process and a way of doing it. So it's actually really great because it means that our authority is derived by everybody that's using the service that lives. All the hams in the area basically say you're the one that we're going to look to for doing this. So the next question is great. You're a repeater coordinator. What exactly does that mean? What does a repeater coordinator do? And honestly, about 90% of it is bookkeeping. It really comes down to bookkeeping. It's making sure to account for all the repeaters that are on the air and all of the particular operating parameters that they have, meaning how high are their antennas, what is their effective ERP, how did you calculate that ERP, what PL tones you're using, all of these kind of things that go into keeping track of where all the repeaters are in the world, or not in the world, but in Western Washington. That's basically about 90% of what the WWARA does. And there's a process, there's band chairs that keep track of it, each individual band. My old role as a secretary was doing a lot of the entering and managing the computer bits of it. And that's most of what we do. There's another small sliver, what I call 9%, which is arbitration. So every once in a while, there are cases where one repeater owner or groups of users say they're interfering with us, and we have to step in and basically be an arbitrator and try to work out how we're going, whether, well, first of all, whether it's really is interference or not, because that's actually it's something that a lot of people, I don't think, have a firm grasp of what interference really means, and then working with both sides in order to get the issue resolved. Luckily, most of the time, it's not really interference. Being able to hear another repeater on the frequency doesn't mean that you're being interfered with. If you can't actually use the repeater, because the capture effect is grabbing the other one instead, that's actually where it becomes interference, and that really doesn't happen very often. More often than not, it's that I can hear something else, so therefore they're interfering with me. And this is where I love to give the funny little story or anecdote. A couple years ago, we had a repeater in Salem, Oregon, complain to us that a repeater up in Whatcom County had obviously radically changed their power and antenna and everything, and that they're now interfering with us all the time. And well, honestly, as a 2-meter DXer, I thought, wow, that's impressive. That's really quite the hop for FM to take. And oh yeah, it's during the summer. And it just magically appeared when the Whatcom County repeater didn't actually change anything, and it got us thinking, that sounds like skip. That's something that happens sometimes during the summer. Let's see if it actually just goes away on its own in a couple days, which it magically did. So yeah, more often than not, interference really isn't interference, which means it's good because we don't actually have to do that arbitration bit very often. And this is actually where I like to stop for a second and give a small plug to some of the other things that the WWARA does, which is actually a lot more beneficial for groups like you that have a lot of users. So if you're like me, I went to Seaside been going for Seaside for a very long time, decades at this point. And one of the things that I would always do is that I always pick up a new repeater guide when I was there. And that was great because you had some listing of where they were. But as time went along, that guide became less and less useful because things were changing more rapidly than they could keep up with in print. And a couple years ago, the ARRL even completely stopped printing them. And now that I'm involved with the WWARA, I realize it's actually, we should have put them out of business a while ago, although they were actually using our data. So on the website, and I put the link there at the bottom of the slide, and I'll make these slides available to you so you don't have to worry about trying to grab it. But we publish all of the repeater coordinations in Western Washington every night. So every 24 hours, the list that's on the website gets refreshed. And there's actually three versions of it. There's what I call the human version, which is just a PDF file that lists all of them and gives you the primary information about coverage area and the PL tones and the frequency in and out and the call sign, things like that. And then there's also what I call the computer version of it, the data version, which is a bunch of CSV files, which for computer-wise are comma delimited files, what they are. And these files actually have a lot more information in them, including what the Latin long is for the repeater, and things like when their expiration their coordination expires, and contact information and things like that. So, and the third version is actually someone very, very nice wrote a script for me that takes the CSV file and converts it to the file for chirp. So if you use chirp to program your radios, there's actually a chirp file that you can just suck into the program to program your radios. So this information I think is a big benefit into the area, and I don't think enough people know about it. So I like to give that little plug to it, so people know that it's out there. Some of the other things is that we also are kind of the default band plan owners for VHF, UHF, and microwaves in the area, because the repeaters subband is such a major part of that. As a matter of fact, we just went through our overhaul. Our band plan was a bunch of text lines that had gotten cumbersome to understand, and honestly I was having trouble reading them and grokking what the band plan says. So we just undertook an effort to reformat the band plans. The 70 centimeter band plan is actually available already, and we're going to be doing the 2 meter one next, which is the next most complicated. And it's much longer, it's much bigger, but it's also a lot easier to understand over. So that's another thing that's out there for people to go use and grab. The other thing I just want to point out is that we're not just repeater owners. Regular hams that are just users are more than welcome to be members. With the pandemic and the forced changes that it has on all of us, we've moved all of our meetings now to be done through Zoom. And everybody that has really enjoyed them, because we have a very we're not a localized group. We're spread out all over the state. So having meetings was always a challenge, because it always meant that it was too far away for somebody. So with the Zoom meetings, we're able to have a lot more participation. And I think we're going to just continue to do that. I think the only meeting we may not do over Zoom will be we typically have one at Seaside every year. And that's been really, really popular. And it's obviously someplace that most of us go anyway, so it works out. So that'll probably be the only in-person one when we hopefully get back to normal pretty soon. So I'm going to pause there for a second. Is there any questions at this point?
If you have a question, please raise your hand in the participants.
This is Daniel Stevens, KSM WM.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Scott Honecker, and you for doing the online database stuff. That's been a huge, huge benefit. Some of us who use it looking for frequencies, put repeaters on, and to the users who's looking for a repeater in their area. That's been something that WWARA has been talking about for about 20 years, and maybe 8 years ago you guys have done it. It's a huge benefit for all the amateurs in the area. Thank you guys.
Yeah, it was it was funny. It came about because it's something that I was using all the time, and someone made some comment about, well, you're the only one that can have it. It's like, I can make it available to everybody. It's not really that hard to do. So I did the data, the computer version of it first, because that was the easiest, and then John Hayes, K7VE, was nice enough to help me figure out a way to convert it to PDF. So now there's a human-friendly version of it as well. So yeah, I'm afraid it's one of those things that most people don't know about, and that's why I love to give the plug for it here. Was there any other questions? Okay, then
sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Robin has his hand up.
Yes, Robin.
Yeah, Kenny, I really appreciate this. Is a great presentation. Just one quick question. I was looking at your website and I'm wondering, do you have any kind of a Excel version of the spreadsheet that we could then double click on any of the top column headings, which then will sort according to those headings?
So so the CSV file, which is in the zip archive, so you have to download the zip archive and grab the CSV file. You can pull that right into Excel. Excel reads it and you can then manipulate it whatever you want. I do a CSV file because it's generic, so not only can Excel will take it fine, but any of the open source versions will take it fine. Plus, people that want to do scripts that manipulate the data, then it's in the right format that any sort of Linux script can take advantage of it. So it's the least common denominator format, but it works perfectly fine in Excel.
Super. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Yep. The other thing I'll just mention, it just kind of occurred to me. One of the things that is part of the process of managing coordinations and going through the coordination process, there's traditionally we've always made the back behind the scenes stuff wasn't ever publicly visible. It's something that we actually publish now during the meetings, but that's also something where we're moving towards allowing everybody to see exactly where the repeater coordination is during the process. There's a very, very simple tracking system in it, which is just nothing more than a Google spreadsheet that Scott and I started using when we did some cleanup of the 70 centimeter band a while ago, and it's just continued to be used by the band chairs since then. And that's been one of the things that we've been talking about also publishing. It's just notes about on this date, we talked to this person, this is what the outcome is, type of thing. So that's also something that may not be as interesting to regular users, but to repeater owners, so they can see where they are in the process. So, and with that, I'm gonna flip things. So now you know what the WWARA does, and you know why we go through it and what we do with it. So I'm going to talk about now what I like to call the other 1% of what our charter is, and that's really being the stewards of this limited resource that is the repeater subbands in the UHF VHF microwave for our hobby. And there's actually a requirement in the FCC regs about being as most efficient as possible with the utilization of our communication. So and you know, we being in the Northwest, we seem to be on the leading edge of a lot of technology stuff. Things happen here before they generally seem to expand out into the rest of the United States. And so we I think are in the place where we start seeing things happening slightly ahead of other areas. And so I love to throw out this William Gibson quote. The future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And that's kind of been the gist of the rest of this, is that we've been in the middle of this transition for a while, and I just don't think that we necessarily understood it. So a little bit of history. So taking a step back in time, in the 1950s, roughly, AM repeaters started becoming a thing. And obviously before I was born, so I don't have any firsthand knowledge of it, but that was, you know, that was cool. That was a big thing. And then in the 70s, the shift started happening, and the shift from AM to FM. And I don't have a lot of direct knowledge, but because I was licensed as a teenager, I was lucky enough to get lots of very old magazines, a lot of 73 magazines, as a matter of fact. So a lot of Wayne Green thinking got filtered into my young head, and he was constantly talking about the fights and the turmoil that went on between the AM to FM shift. So that 70s time period was when, you know, analog FM repeaters started becoming a thing. Fast forward about another 20 years, and you see the actual first digital repeater system, so the P25 project. And there's actually different versions of it now, but that's kind of like the first time that started being a thing, where you weren't using analog, but you're actually digitizing the voice and sending the digital the bits over the air. Fast forward again, I guess that's about 15 years this time, and ICOM introduces the D-Star system. So this was the first open ham only digital radio solution, and ICOM did a lot of effort to push it. So it's a very well established thing now. That's where we got to see the first really linking of repeaters, which is pretty much, I think, what makes the digital system so cool. A couple years after that, DMR became a thing for the first time, and this is the encumbered commercial solution, but it's been adopted to ham radio as well. And we in the Northwest have a very extensive DMR repeater solution systems. I think there's coverage now from certainly lower BC well into the central Oregon along I-5. So just a really, really vast DMR repeater systems. And then a couple years after that, 2013, the FCC actually required all commercial repeater stations to go to narrowband. So the narrowband being 12.5 kilohertz wide deviation signals. That's about half of what most amateur stuff is for comparison. So there's this slow transition and migration of technology that's actually been going on for a long time. It's not something that's new, but I think a lot of hams don't necessarily have the wide enough view, so they don't realize that, oh, it hasn't always been analog FM repeaters, that there's been something before it, and there's been new things that are going to be coming after it. So there's this evolution that's happening, which is going to kind of be an ongoing theme. So I'm going to talk real quick about some definitions, some terms that I'm going to start throwing around repeatedly to kind of help. And I have a very pretty picture to help kind of guide people through this. I don't know if you can see my mouse. I don't think you can. Yep. So I'm just going to make believe that you read it. So when I talk about wideband analog, that's a 5 kilohertz deviation signal, and it actually occupies 6 kilohertz of bandwidth when in use. And initially it was the channels that were allocated for repeaters were 25 kilohertz wide. So that allowed there to be a guard band on each side of the occupied bandwidth. And I don't remember when this was. It was before my time in Washington. I think it was the late 80s, early 2000s. They shifted 2 meters from 25 kilohertz to 20 kilohertz, and that allowed more repeater channels to exist. And it took a long time to finally get done, but it's been that way for a while now, so everybody just assumes that. So 2 meters is 20 kilohertz wide, and 70 centimeters, and the other bands are actually 25 kilohertz wide. So, and if you're following along and you're big on the FCC definitions, wideband analog is 16K0F3E to the FCC, which I think we should all start using because it just rolls off the tongue so easily. But there's also something called narrowband analog, and as you can probably imagine, it's not as wide as the wideband, so it uses a 2.5 kilohertz deviation signal, and that occupies about 12.5 kilohertz instead. And the FCC has a great name for it, 11K2F3E. So you can probably start seeing a trend there in how they're defining things. So, and just for completion's sake, there's actually something called ultra narrowband, which is 6.25, so half as wide again. And the FCC phrasing, that's phrased phase 2 of their, because at some point they're going to require everybody to go to ultra narrowband probably as well. So there's a bunch of different digital signals as well. So narrowband analog's one that fits in 12.5 kilohertz channel, but there's also every single digital solution fits in narrowband as well. So if you are using DMR today, you're using narrowband. If you're using D-Star, you're using actually ultra narrowband. If you're using P25, you're using narrowband. So narrowbanding has already started. You hadn't really started thinking about it that way. And I will just throw out one other thing, and I need to put it on the slide. There's actually a narrowband analog system that's on the air right now that's pretty wide coverage. Rich KF7 BJI converted the 146.88 machine to narrowband analog, so it's 146.875 now. and that's up on East Tiger. So it's fairly wide coverage. So at the end of this talk, if you feel, oh, I want to actually go try this, I'll give some details about how you can go do it. But there's actually a system you can go try out a little bit later.
Hey, Kenny, we
Yeah.
have one question
Sure.
from Carl.
Carl, go ahead.
CJR.
I'm sorry, Kenny. This was back not in this section. It was back in another section where you're talking about just regular people can join. What would, for example, what would you do as a non-repeater owner if you joined the repeater?
What would you do? So
Yeah.
so we have meetings, we have policy decisions that need to be voted on. And part of the reason that I'm giving these talks, because this is my 7th or 8th one, is because I want, so there's a change that's coming, and I'm going to be talking about how that change might work. And because it's not just repeater owners, but the users as well that are going to be impacted, the reason for this talk is to just make people aware of it and to start getting feedback from repeater owners and regular users, because it's going to impact virtually everybody that uses repeaters in our area. So that's another way that non-repeater owners can contribute to and be a part of it. So that's the why. It obviously there's we're not a big social group. We only meet 4 times a year. We don't have cool prizes. We don't run a giant ham fest, anything like that. It's more of a infrastructure type of meeting group. So if that's the type of thing that's interesting to you, this is a great place to get started. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. So let's talk about where the state of the world is right now. So 2013, the entire commercial repeater area or commercial repeater systems from the FCC all switched to narrowband. So that's 7 years ago now. And because the FCC published that this was going to happen almost 7, 8, 10 years before, all the equipment started transitioning as well, about well before that. And because that was the date, that meant after 2013, you couldn't have a commercial wideband system on the air. It had to be turned off. So that was a light switch moment. I mentioned this already. There are a lot of narrowband digital repeaters that are on the air already. A lot of them. DMR just has been a huge explosion. There's a lot of D-Star in the area. There's handfuls of P25, and it's I've noticed that traditionally the Pacific Northwest is just slightly on the leading edge of stuff. So whatever the next greatest digital thing is, I'm sure it will start showing up here pretty early. So there's this narrowband transition has really already started with all of the digital stuff that's happening. Other things that people don't always understand is that there really hasn't been an open or available 2-meter pair in a long time, decades actually. And so people think, a lot of groups that they form a new club and it's like, we need a repeater, we'll go get a 2-meter pair and put a repeater up. And I almost have to laugh because 2 meters is so popular and it's so crowded. It's not that we have 1 repeater on every pair, but we have 2 and 3 repeaters on a lot of pairs. So any way that we can cram them in and use the large piles of dirt that make up the Western Washington to provide isolation between them, people have put them into use. So there's demand for 2 meters in a big way that people don't quite understand. The other thing that happened is this happened in 2018. We ran out of 440 pairs for the first time. So there wasn't any more 440 open pairs either. Luckily that, management, we've moved some off, shifted some around. There's a couple that are open right now, I think, but it changes, fairly regularly. So there's a lot of people wanting to put repeaters on 440 now as well. So there's a demand for putting more systems up. The other thing that I did some numbers, ran some numbers, and the actual coordinations of new repeaters started increasing around 2013. And I think that a lot of that was due to people wanting to put new digital repeaters on the air, because in that same time period since 2013, there's been a 77% increase in digital repeaters. So there's a trend of people wanting to put on more repeaters. There's a trend of there not being enough repeater pairs, and there's a lot of people interested in digital. So that's some of the thoughts that started going through my head. And I came to the realization about 2 years ago that we are moving to narrowband, and we've been doing it for a while without really realizing it. And this scared me a little bit because I knew that our band plan wasn't set up right. We were really being inefficient with the scarce resource of 2 meter or 470 centimeter band pairs or repeater pairs, because we were putting narrowband repeaters into wideband slots. And something it's actually a very Amazonian thing is that when you want to go do something, you start by defining where you want to end up, and then you work backwards from it. So we formed a committee, and the first thing that we did is we said, okay, if we were going to turn a switch and we're going to completely convert 2 meters to narrowband tomorrow, what would it look like? And we didn't get it right the first time. It actually took a couple of tries, and along the way, we realized some really important things about that. Even though we did things and the math worked out right, it wasn't feasible because the tuning steps on radios that support narrowband wouldn't necessarily fit the plans that we came up initially. So we jiggered some things, and we did a lot of research going back, 20 years, was when the first narrowband radio started showing up on the market. And we went, okay, the radios that exist that can do narrowband, their tuning steps will allow us to do this with the channel allotments, the channel sizes, and the frequency of the allocations. So we've come up with a plan says that if we flipped everything today, this is what 2 meters would look like. We then went back and did the same thing for 70 centimeters, which was actually a lot easier to do. And we started talking about this and started getting feedback on it. One of the things that we also realized, this Scott brings this up repeatedly, is that when you go to narrowband, not every repeater is going to necessarily have to change frequency even. There are some that just transfer straight across, and then the next one up basically has to move a little bit. But honestly, none of the repeaters, if everybody had to switch immediately, they don't move very much. It's actually only a few kcs in most cases. So that makes it a really easy transition if you have a repeater today that can be converted to narrowband, meaning that your filtering just needs to be adjusted. So your duplexers need a slight adjustment, and you're ready to go. And I mentioned before that the commercial space was forced to move to narrowband over 7 years ago. What that means is that there's a lot of surplus gear that is now in use for hams that actually supports narrowband already. So transitionally wise, there's a lot of opportunity there that we can do. Trying to think of what else. Oh, so I don't have the whole band plans published here. There's a white paper that we wrote that's on the WWARA website. It actually in the appendices has the 2 meter and the 7 centimeter band plans, if you're curious to what those exactly look like. So with the definition of where we want to end up at some point in the future, now comes the thought experiment. And I'll be very upfront, caveat this right away. This is literally a thought experiment. I put dates in place to help force people to think through what are some of the ramifications of doing these sort of things, because I've just found that if you don't put specific dates on things and people are fuzzy about them, that you don't necessarily think about it in the right way. It was like, oh, wait a minute, that's going to cause a problem, or oh, that's actually not so scary type of thing. So
Kenny, can we go back a minute?
Sure, go ahead.
Go
You had a
back one
question?
slide.
Well, this is Scott. So I was just going to make sure that everybody understood that. So this odd diagram is specifically for 2 meters because we have at some point in the past, which none of us seem to remember, we migrated from 25 kilohertz channels to 20 kilohertz channels, and it must have been painful, but apparently everybody got over it because nobody seems to know how that happened. On 2 meters, it's complicated to go from 20 kilohertz to 12.5 kilohertz because it doesn't divide out evenly. So we have this, well, it turns out to not be quite as complicated as some of the other things that we came up with that we thought we were being super clever with. This is actually a pretty straightforward 2 channels turn into 3 channels thing with a little bit of sliding. But on 70 centimeters, we get substantially more because each channel is already 25 kilohertz, 12.5 is exactly half. So we just cut every channel in half. And so somebody stays and we get a channel kind of on either side. So as for every single wideband channel that we create, or every 2 wideband channels create, we end up with potentially 4 narrowband channels. So it actually works pretty nicely. And as Kenny mentioned, we already have a bunch of these systems on the air. So some of this for 70 centimeters, well, in fact, in 70 centimeters, we've already started a little of this.
Yeah, I thank you, Scott. I completely skipped over that. This goes back to the fact that it's been happening for a while. 21% of the coordinations on 70 centimeters is already narrowband. So if we could somehow group them all together and shift everybody to, we could say, this is all narrowband, and it would have no impact on users other than they have to reprogram the radios. That 21%, that was actually last year. So I probably need to go rerun the numbers because I'll bet you that it's actually increased.
Hey
yes,
Kenny,
go ahead,
we have
Steve.
it's Jim.
Oh, Jason,
we have
sorry.
That's all right. We have a couple of questions that people have raised their hand.
Sure.
Daniel KL7 WM.
Yeah, Kenny, how many repeaters do we have in the area? How many is on 440, and how many channels on 440? How many channels on 2 meters?
So you can go figure that out from the coordination list. I don't know off the top of my head, Daniel.
Okay, I think we've got about 430 plus repeaters in the area. There's 200 channels on 440, which is good. You're talking about doubling. And then there's 59 channels on 2 meters, which we got almost 100 repeaters in at this point. So it's pretty well used.
Yeah, the 2 meters is definitely what I would call saturated because it's not a 1-to-1, it's a 2 or 3-to-1 in many cases. Meaning that 1 2-meter frequency pair will have 2 or 3 repeaters on it, depending on where you are that are geographically separated.
Yeah, so even if we do the 3 channels for 2 on the 2 meters, we're still going to be at 90 channels, and we have more repeaters in Western Washington on 2 meters than we have channels with the new plan. But if we don't move forward right now, it's going to get just worse.
Well, it won't get any worse because we're full on 2 meters, right? So it will stay where it's at. But what this does is it allows more repeater systems to be put up, which is something that, because obviously people are coordinating more repeaters, so that's something that wants to be happen. So did Daniel, that answer your question?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know the scope of what we're dealing with. When you have 400 to 500, we're one of the busier coordinators in the nation, in the Seattle area, and 2 meters is 170% full. In other words, we almost have 2 repeaters for every channel. It's really a tremendous job that the WWARA is doing.
Yeah, so I've talked to a lot of different repeater coordination groups, and the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that repeater coordination is very different depending on where you are in the country. And the reason for that is, one, you have different kinds of users, so you have different desires, different needs, and 2, geographically, we have a unique situation that doesn't necessarily exist in many places. So we are very large mountain range that is to the west of us that pretty much blocks anything from eastern Washington. We have mountains all over the place, so even on between us and the ocean, there's a lot of dirt piles that can't get through. Obviously, we have the Pacific Ocean to the west of us. We have an international body that we have no official interactions with technically in BC. And then to the south of us in Oregon, we have a fairly active group in the Portland metro area. That makes it kind of unique. You could compare us to, say, Florida, where they have large body of water that surrounds them. They have an international groups all over the Caribbean that they deal with, but they're flat. I think Brian said the tallest place in Florida is one of their bridges, and it's like 150 feet high. So they coordinate in a completely different way than we do because their geographic's different. To Daniel's point about busyness, I think the LA area is the worst in the country, but I could be wrong about that. That's just a gut feeling on my part.
Kenny, we have another question from Joan, KX2CW.
Yeah, Joan.
This may just be a curio, but if you're going to go to 12 and a half, are you going, there's two questions. Then are you going to, is the imagined result?
I'm sorry, you cut out.
Dropped out.
I think her internet froze.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, Kenny, go ahead and keep going. We'll get her up.
Okay. I actually have a feeling that that my next area is gonna answer her question because I think I knew where she was going. So caveats: this is not a done deal. This is not these dates are made up. It's a thought experiment to help discuss a possibility of way that we get from where we are today to these band plans that we've designed for narrow banding. So. And as I mentioned, the whole point of these talks is to get feedback about what do people think about this? Is this scary? Is this, no, we should never do this, you're crazy? You know, where are you? Somewhere in between. So the first proposal is, say, in 2 years from now, we, as the WWRA, take a section of the 44 70 centimeter band and say, this is now narrow band. We're not going to put any wideband systems in here anymore, and we're going to actively work with repeater owners to shift any wideband out of it and make this now the narrow band section of 70 centimeters. And as systems come and go, you know, we'd obviously just keep expanding it. But 2 years, this is the point where we're going to say, you know, this 1 megahertz of repeater subband is now narrow only, and we're going to actively work with people to get them out of there. That shouldn't be too hard to do, I don't think, because 70 centimeter stuff typically is newer. We obviously have a large percentage that is narrow band already, so it's just a matter of moving them there and creating space for other people. So that's kind of the first step, the first dipping our toes into the world of moving to a narrowband world. The next step, say 5 years from now, this is a little harder, a little more a bigger step, and we say, you know what, for 2 meters, 70 centimeters, we're not going to accept any new applications. So any new repeaters that want to go on the air, we're not going to allow it to be wideband. It has to be narrowband analog or narrowband digital, and that's, we're just, the doors are closed on new things. We do that 5 years from now, so it'd be 2026 in December. And as space starts becoming available because systems go off the air or whatever, they're going to be filled in with narrowband, and we're going to start having pockets of narrowband, and that's going to slowly start moving the transition along. And then the really big one, this is 10 years from now, a decade from now, we're not going to renew any new we're not going to renew any existing wideband systems. So we're going to go, you know what, I'm really sorry. I'm trying to remember what the mic and key repeater is. Are you guys on, I'm just drawing a complete blank as to what your system is anyway. Guys, you're going to have to move off of this pair that you've been on forever. You're going to have to move it, convert it to narrowband, and you're going to have to do that before you renew your next coordination. So, you know, you guys would do the work you need to. You do the education to all your users to say, you know, on June 23rd and 2000, what would it be? 2031. Everybody's going to have to change their programming on the radio, that we're going to officially move the repeater 145.33, that's what it is, to narrowband analog. Or maybe you guys go digital at that point, or maybe you've done it, you know, 5 years before, because this is what everybody wants. So that is one way that I can see moving from where we are today to narrowband. And it sounds big and scary, because it's the change feels like it's forcing people. But remember, this is a very long time from now, and the transition and move is that we're moving to digital solutions anyway. And the more that happens, the more that's going to become the common way of doing things, and we're just kind of, I think we're just going to end up in this space. So that's the thought experiment, the idea of how we could move there. Maybe it's not 2, 5, and 10. Maybe it's 5, 10, and 15. I don't know for sure. But that's the thought. I wanted to get that idea out to people. I wanted people to think about it. I want them to throw your stones, throw the rotten fruit, to hear the feedback, or like, oh wow, why don't we do this tomorrow? Which is, I've actually had people tell me that as well during these talks.
Kenny, we have another question.
I'm good. I figured there'd be a couple. Go ahead.
Chuck, WA7EBH, one of our founders.
Yeah, a couple items here. For your presentation, the shift to 20 kilohertz was back in about 75 to 77. It was proposed by Bob St. Andre and adopted by the WWARA at that point in time. I'm not sure of his current call, but his former call was WA7NAN at that point in time. I've been involved with this stuff since the 60s. The other deal is, I don't hear you telling the group here, my $500 radio that I just bought doesn't have the narrow band programming in it. How do you propose these people that have $2,000–3,000 worth of VHF, UHF, dual band, tri-band radios? You're not going to force them to go out and spend more money to buy narrow band radios. Wideband radios do not work on narrow band. The deviation is too wide for the bandwidth and that sort of thing. I used to work in commercial side of things, so I was involved with when they first started doing stuff back in the 80s for narrow banding and going the digital stuff. So how do you propose to address this from the user standpoint, not necessarily the repeater owner standpoint?
No, that's a great question, Chuck. And I was sort of waiting for someone to bring that up. First of all, I'm very curious as to what $500 radio you just bought that doesn't support narrowband, because based on our research, you have to go back about 20 years before you find an amateur radio that doesn't actually support it. I think it was ICOM 706 was the last major radio that was sold that didn't support some form of narrowband analog. Everything I've seen that's been being sold today supports it. You may not realize that it supports it, but it actually is there. So I'm actually very curious what radio you have that doesn't do it.
Okay,
certainly.
To answer your question, I have some 742s, the tri-band radios, Iesu, and a bunch of older handhelds, not the current Bofang stuff that's coming out that everybody seems to, buy. But some of the older Kenwoods and that sort of thing that don't have that option in them. They're strictly were built for the wideband. So you're making those all obsolete with the proposals. So I'm just throwing that out there from a customer use standpoint for the folks that have radios that pick them up at flea markets and all that sort of thing. How do you plan on addressing that issue for the people?
Okay, so it's not a new radio. You bought a used one that was probably more than 25 years old then. That actually makes more sense. You're right. You're absolutely right. There, in any sort of technical transition, there is going to be some percentage of equipment that doesn't support the new thing. So just like the transition from AM to FM, everybody had to buy new gear in order to support the FM repeaters, and to support the new digital stuff, everybody has to buy a new radio in order to support the new digital repeater system. So you're absolutely right. That type of having to buy something new will happen, will exist.
Kenny?
Yeah.
So this is Scott. I wanted to mention, so when we looked, I think the most recent radio that we could find that was still being sold was in about the 2008 timeframe, and it was a Kenwood D700 that didn't have, how do you say this? So the Kenwoods actually have a narrowband feature, and I haven't looked at the 742. I'm going to go look now. The Kenwoods actually the 700 had a narrowband feature. The trick was it was system wide. You couldn't actually program it on a channel by channel basis, which is really unfortunate. So even they had it. The reason for that is because in 1997, that was the first time the FCC announced that there would be this transition to narrowband in the public safety sector, in the commercial sector. And so starting in that time, they actually mandated that everybody have narrowband on the commercial side. So the ham radios kind of inherited it after that point. However, as I mentioned, it wasn't necessarily implemented very well. So there is there are some pretty old radios that have it. They just don't have it. They just don't implement it well. That's all. And I'm curious about the 742, but generally you'll find that almost all these things, and of course, so we're still talking about radios that are right now, the newest one we could find is currently 13 years old, and we're not talking about making this change for another 10 years. So at that point, your radio is at best 23 years old, and maybe it's time to retire it. It's provided you good service, right? I mean, that's kind of the thought. There's even with the 742, this is no direct replacement, but I've been buying the current version of a 742 that offers me tri-band capability is like the Anytone you can get them for about $400, right? So not cheap, but they do. There is something that's similar currently on the market, and it offers you DMR. It has a gorgeous little color display. We've also seen like 742. I've looked at 742s myself, but people have been having problems with parts availability and failures, and so some of that is natural. There's going to be some natural selection happening in the next few years anyway, as these systems, both repeater systems and the commercial term is subscriber units, right? Your personal client-owned radios, as those things die. Some of that stuff, now's a good time to start maybe considering what the next radio might be. Like, how terrible a problem is that to have, right? Anyway, the other thing I was going to mention is, not only did we look at these radios, but and how this migration might occur, because that is a problem. There's definitely going to be some issues with the hardware not being compatible with some of these older radios, but all the current radios do it, number one. And but it also requires, and this is not a trivial thing, I'm sure somebody was going to mention it, but I'll throw it out there. It requires actually finding that feature in your radio, which nobody has ever done to this point. So first off, so to some extent, it's a little easy because all digital modes are inherently narrowband. So as Kenny mentioned, most of our new coordinations are digital. So that just happens. DMR, System Fusion, D-Star, they're already narrow. So, and as we add more digital repeaters, it just happens. So the only thing left is analog FM. And if that's where we need to figure out how to get people to reprogram their radios from a wideband to a narrowband. I have to give you one personal anecdote, which this is kind of fun for me, because the very first time I went to a Mike and Key meeting was back in the 90s, sometime probably mid 90s. And I remember there was a huge discussion about the Mike and Key repeater was going to be adding a tone. And that was causing no end of consternation in the meeting, because not everybody's radio could do tones in the 90s. So anyway, so this is kind of funny to hear. Like, we're kind of going through another transition like this again, right? That's kind of what we're looking at. Anyway, thank you.
So guys, we're coming up to the top of the hour. There is 2 other people with their hands raised. If we can knock those out. Hal, N7NW.
Okay. Yeah, I get it right. Yeah, I'm the radio officer for the Mike and Key, N7NW, and our repeater is on 146.82. This is not really, if anybody's been in ham radio a long time, like Chuck and I and everybody else, we've been through a lot of changes, and there was a lot of stuff that goes around that, a lot of people, I did not have, but a lot of people had the old Motorola's in the trunk of your car. So and they took up a lot of space. So there's been a lot of changes, and this is not something that you guys are proposing to do, come across, but I think it does, it behoove us as a repeater owner group and user group to start looking at the future and start perhaps some discussion, putting together a plan whether we would want to go to a narrowband or just go to digital. So that's something to consider and think about. And I think that our club will probably be supporting that.
Thank you, Hal. That's great, and that's really I think Scott was alluding to with the tone stuff. There's an education element that has to be a part of whatever plan that we come up with to transition. We had talked about doing a series of talks at Com Academy last year, or this year, I should say, and part of that was like, oh yeah, this is how you reprogram, 3 of the most common radios. It's not rocket science. It's not hard. It's literally click, click, and it's moved. And there is a system that they could, you can go use today and play with it. So it's like I said, we are already in the middle of the transition. All I'm doing is putting a spotlight on it. So, and I apologize, I did run over. I was trying really, really hard to get it into an hour. So was there any other questions before you guys kick us out?
Yeah, we've got one more from Dick, WA7NIW.
Yeah, Dick.
Yeah. I've been through this narrowband thing before. In fact, when I moved last year, I actually finally threw out some 15 kilohertz deviation FM gear because that was the old wideband, and now we're looking at calling 5 kilohertz wideband. It's been an interesting transition. My question though has to do with continuing to once you've got some repeaters going narrowband and you've shifted them into a portion of 440, why accept any more wideband designations at all? Why not make everything narrowband on new applications? Because it seems like we're just extending the lifetime of the dinosaur.
So your proposal to rephrase it is skip step 1, go straight to step 2.
Well, step 1 is to take all the narrowband ones and put them in one little sandbox.
Yep.
Step 2 is to only, as I saw it there, the 5-year thing is
stop taking new.
Stop accepting new wideband. It seems like that's an unnecessary step, because if somebody's buying a new repeater to put up, I don't see that it's advantageous to anybody to put up the old technology when they're going to have to replace it in another 5 years anyway.
So just to be, I'm going to be over communicative about this. That was a proposal that's not been voted on. That's not been officially adopted, nothing. So that was just a thought experiment to get feedback. Your feedback though actually doesn't sound crazy to me at all. It actually makes a lot of sense. The one thing I'll share with you though is that we get new applications for wideband analog systems on 70 centimeters every week. So maybe it's just a matter of saying we're not going to do it anymore. And if there is wide support for that, I am all for it. I think it speeds up the transition, and that would be a good thing. But I don't want to mandate it without getting the feedback of the user community, which all the groups, which is why we're doing these talks. So thank you for your feedback. I applaud it, and I think it's not a bad idea at all.
Well, okay. I just wanted to throw that out because it seemed like you were, you had an unnecessary step there, and it was just going to, prolong the pain.
Okay, we have one more question from Sam, N7RHE.
Yeah, Ken, that's Sam, N7RHE. I'm the radio officer for the KIT Communications Support Team on 147.32, which was coordinated informally with a co-channel in British Columbia. And we did that by email and stuff, and found out that what we were getting was really skip. So that's been taken care of by judicious PL selections on both sides of the border. Secondly, to bring back some history, I think we all missed 6 toes since he went silent key. And were you aware that his wife, Kathy, went silent key?
No, I wasn't aware of that. I don't think I knew him.
He was his secretary. Well, he was on the team 10 to 15 years ago, probably.
Yeah, that predates my tenure with the WWARA.
All righty. Thank you, Kenny, for a great discussion here and a great presentation. Looks like I got a couple of little pop-ups. Let me.
Kenny, was that the end of your presentation? We didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah.
So the only thing I had left was a link of slides of links. So I'll generate a PDF and I'll share it with, well, whoever amongst you shares
Kenny,
it.
Go ahead and send it to me, and I'll post it in our various places for the club.
Thank you, Jason. I'll get that sent to you in just a couple minutes.
Hey, I got one more thing, just as a courtesy. Joan dropped out, and Joan, you want to jump in again because your internet died and
we squashed your question.
Yeah, squashed your question.
Sorry, Joan. What was your question?
All right, there are really kind of two questions. One was maybe trivial, is like, I'm just out of curiosity, when you go back to go to 12.5 kilohertz spacing on 2 meters, I assume that it'll be the old grid that was 25 kilohertz spacing, but with extra channels in between. It would make sense. And the other is, if there was still room, lots and lots of guard band going to 20 kilohertz spacing, why not go to 10 kilohertz spacing and 5 kilohertz spacing and round them off?
So the way that the transition would work is that the sections of 2 meters that are repeater bands, the old channels would come away and the new channels would go in. We're literally replacing it. That's how it would work, and it would be done in probably in pockets. So every time we get two 2 meter channels that are 20 kilohertz today available, we put 3 narrowband in place of them. So that's how the leapfrogging transition would work. The reason that it's 12 and a half is there's some technical bits that go along with it. It's not just the numbers be nice if we just rounded them. There's other considerations there that go into it, which we don't have time for, and I'm probably not the best person to try to explain it either. So if you guys want to have us back, we can certainly try to dig into why the channel sizes are the way that they are.
Kenny, this is Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah. The reason we wanted to go 12 and a half is because you can split it in half and go ultra narrow band 6 1/4. Thank you.
Right, but then the next question is why 6 1/4 and not 6? Why isn't it 12 and 6 instead? So it's a little more complicated than that.
For the commercial, so we kind of fall in the commercial people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I assume it's that it's to jive with the commercial spacing.
Yep.
That to keep up with what the radios will do, tuning wise.
Okay.
Yeah, because I see 10 kilohertz as available spacing and programming on new radios. You can go 5 and 10. You could pack more in, and it seems like the actual active part of the spectrum that's being used is narrow enough that you could go to a 5 and 10 spacing, but we have to jive with. We're doing it because that's the way we're doing it.
I would like to add a quick comment, boss.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm quite well aware that many of the local emergency support groups have been wanting to put up their own repeater. That should be only done on narrowband or maybe even ultra narrow. And they've got people buying handhelds left and right. I sure hope, if we get them going, let's push them into the narrowband. End of comment.
Thanks. All righty. Kenny, you reached the high water mark, dude. Thank you for an awesome. Yeah.
Jim, can I say something really quick in regards to that, as far as not accepting any more wideband applications? We actually have had a complaint raised a couple of weeks ago with the FCC saying that we were not allowing any new analog wideband applications, and we had to explain ourselves to them. So this is a bit of a dance.
Okay.
Definitely. Well, again, Kenny, Scott, Steve, thank you for joining us today and sharing the information. And if anyone's got questions for Kenny, I can forward you off to him. And Kenny, I'll take a look for your email and we'll post your presentation. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us today and the great feedback. Really appreciate it.
You bet. All right, Jim, back to you.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and